Hi, active members of the Music Club and associate members and friends who have found your way to our website. This is the first study meeting, and our guest presenter today is Bob Skinner, who makes his home in New Orleans and makes his living, among other things, restoring pianos and performing with various symphony orchestras with the intriguing instrument he builds called the theremin. This instrument is named after its inventor, Leon Theremin, a Russian scientist who was also a cellist. And he had prominent mentors, not the least of which was the physicist and amateur violinist, Albert Einstein. In 1928, Theremin patented this instrument in the United States and set up a laboratory and continued to experiment with electronic instruments that we are so familiar with today. He worked with Henry Cowell on something called a rhythmicon. I really don't know what that is, but it sounds like it might be interesting. If you're a fan of the film Spellbound, you will surely recognize the eerie sound of the theremin. This is a return visit for Bobby. If you remember, he performed for us in a recital in 2009 with David Easley at the piano. After the presentation, a few of you had a chance to put hands on the theremin and see what it feels like and how it really works. Sorry, we can't do that today, but we're counting on Bobby to lift our spirits with his program called Ethereal Music, Part 1. Take it away, Bobby.
Rita, thank you so much for that kind introduction, and I'm flattered to death that the Music Club of Baton Rouge has asked me back again this year to experiment with our new format here. The last time I was asked to your club, it was simply a program of music with not a lot of talking, and there wasn't a great deal of time for me to introduce the theremin and where it came from, why it happened, some information about Dr. Theremin himself and how he stumbled on the concept of the theremin and then later introduced it to the world as the world's first electronic instrument. Early at the turn of the century, the last century, when radio, television, all electronics were in their infancy, Dr. Theremin, who was a Russian-born physicist and electrical engineer, and I'm saying electrical engineer loosely because at the turn of the century, of course, electricity was in its infancy, and Dr. Theremin, among others, were trying to think of creative uses for the new technology. So it wouldn't come as a surprise that a musical instrument would come out of the ether, so to speak, with Dr. Theremin in Russia, the Soviet Union, experimenting with electricity and electronic devices that were not intended for music, but Dr. Theremin's focus was, as you would expect in Russia, the Soviet Union, wanted him to create spy devices and electronic devices that could surveil perhaps people with not so good intentions coming up to government buildings. So one of his surveillance devices that he invented was basically a proximity device on the corner of a building, a government building perhaps, and the comrades who were inside drinking vodka may not be paying attention to what's going on outside, but using a device that was able to sense the approach of a body to the building, a pitch would go up and alarm them that somebody was getting close to the building, and as the pitch went down, as they went away from the building, that would let them know that somebody was leaving the premises. Well, Dr. Theremin was in his lab experimenting and fine-tuning some of his equipment when he realized that the thing had some musical potential because, after all, it is pitch. And as a trained cellist, Theremin realized that if he could contain that principle inside of a box and learn to control the pitch with somewhat accuracy, then he would be able to actually play a tune and then perhaps introduce it to Lenin and then tell the world basically that Russia is now the preeminent inventor of the latest and most sophisticated use of electromagnetism. So you're probably wondering, how on earth did he come up with the principle of the musical instrument part of this device? Well, if you sort of think of when you go into the grocery store or into any store these days, of course we take all these things for granted. There's an electromagnetic field over the door that senses when you come close to the door to the grocery store. Well, the door opens automatically, and to us that's just second nature. We don't even think about it. But of course, back then this principle was fairly new, and Theremin realized that not only did he have the pitch component to deal with his new instrument. As I said, with the early surveillance device, we only dealt with pitch. Now you could control the volume, because what he did by controlling it in a box, there are two antennas, two redundant circuits. The one on the right side here creates a magnetic field around this antenna that within 3 feet anywhere of this antenna, it is sensing my body, or for that matter, anybody who comes within, or anything that comes within 3 feet of this antenna. This antenna controls all the pitches of the instrument, from down to 0, which is the front of my body, which is the lowest pitch, and I'll demonstrate that for you in a moment. And then, of course, the highest pitch being the closest part of my body to this antenna. So this is the highest pitch, this is the lowest pitch. The original range of the instrument, as Theremin envisioned it, was to simulate a human voice. Therefore, the original name of the instrument was the Theremin Vox, the voice of Theremin, which, of course, when you think about a human voice, which was sort of his concept, the human voice has a practical singing range of maybe 2 octaves. If you're Madonna, it's only about 5 notes. But of course, if you're an opera singer or someone who's classically trained, or Ima Sumac, or her crazy range, I think she had a range of 4 or 5 octaves. Well, that's an extreme example. But his original concept was for about 2 or 3 practical octaves of use on the instrument. Now, the limitations with that are the length of your arm to the front of your body. So what I'm leading up to is that everybody's body is different, and so everyone who walks up to a theremin has to tune the instrument to the length of their arm, to the size of their body, and the capacitance, your electrical capacitance in your body. Because remember I said earlier on that this is sensing the proximity of your body to the antenna, to the door at the grocery store, and so forth. Well, it's sensing the electrical field around your body. And basically your body is emanating an electrical magnetic field around it, and that's what it's feeling. So this one's doing the pitch. This antenna on the left here is all of the volume. This is articulation. This allows me to play staccato. This plays crescendos and gives it all of the volume control of the instrument. So now we're controlling 2 electromagnetic fields around these antennas. So the basics of playing it involve someone stepping up to the instrument and finding where the lowest pitch on the instrument is. Now, in my case, I'm a fairly small person, so this is about the lowest pitch. And I'm raising just my left hand. I'm not touching anything. And what you're hearing, that change of pitch is my breath. That's how sensitive the instrument is to the movement of your body. So just when I inhale, it's putting my chest just a tiny bit closer to this antenna, and you can hear the pitch changing just with that tiny bit of movement. So you can imagine trying to explain the concept of playing an instrument to someone that has no tactile part of the instrument at all. all the pitches are in the air. Add to that the fact that your body is, not a static thing. You're moving, you're breathing. You cannot move when playing the theremin. It's a very controlled, space-controlled instrument. The space needs to be under control, and so basically you are controlling this electronic bubble around the instrument. Same thing goes with the left hand. So here, so if someone steps up close to this left antenna here on this side, they could inadvertently turn the volume off while I'm in the middle of something. So it's not a very friendly instrument. And I'll give you some examples later on of why, playing with a symphony or playing with a dance orchestra, from personal experience, how that can have disastrous consequences if there's people dancing in the room close to the instrument, or if you're playing in an orchestra in the string section sitting right next to you and the bows of the violins are coming right into the magnetic field of the instrument. It's not a good thing. It's a very difficult thing to control. So, so now that you understand the concept of the instrument, I'm going to move forward to Theremin's existence in the United States. So he comes over from Russia, and after going on tour with the instrument, giving demonstrations all over Europe, all over Russia, he came to the US in the mid-1920s. And after a few demonstrations, some of his fans invited a young lady to his laboratory on 54th Street in Manhattan. And Clara Rockmore was her name, and Clara Rockmore, write it down, there will be a quiz at the end of this class. And I highly recommend that if, of course, everyone has access to a computer and to YouTube. In the 1980s, Bob Moog, this is one of his instruments here. Bob Moog and the producer of one of these films that I'm going to show you a cover of in a moment, went to Russia, found Dr. Theremin and brought him back to the United States, found Clara Rockmore, who was alive and well in Manhattan, and did a series of videos of Clara playing the instrument. And actually, Dr. Theremin, a few years before he died, and were able to get live interviews with him, which are just remarkable. And what I also recommend is you're getting a copy of this. This is the Theremin, and I think it's, yes, an Electronic Odyssey. This is an excellent documentary about Theremin, his history, and lots of performances by Clara Rockmore, who, after a few years of improving the device, she went to his laboratory, heard the instrument playing in the background, and heard this ethereal sound coming from the laboratory. And once she experienced playing the instrument in the air, she never went back to her violin career. She was a trained violinist. So naturally, this concept to her, being able to play in the air, brought to the table the skills that she already had with the violin. So let's move on to the violin. All right, so her being able to play the violin, Theremin's being a cellist, brings you to the idea that it is a fretless instrument. What does that mean? That means that, of course, when you're playing the violin, your finger has to touch the neck of the violin first before you bring the bow down to the string so that you play the correct note. Well, the concept is very similar in playing the theremin. The idea is to bring the pitch up just a little bit, make a correction, and then bring up the volume instantly when you've made the correction for the note. Violinists do this all the time, and the whole concept is that it's a very imprecise instrument in that way, because you're rolling your finger a little bit or sliding a little bit up or down on the string will vary the pitch. It's exactly the same concept when playing the theremin, but in this case, you're not touching anything. So another piece of literature that you probably should get a hold of is this one. This is Glinsky's Theremin, Ether and Espionage. Well, I told you earlier that theremin was used by the Soviet Russian government to make spy devices, and this book goes into a lot more detail about how that complicated his life, and he was actually kidnapped by the KGB, taken back to Russia, where he was exploited for his electronic knowledge to create bugging devices to put in the American embassies and so forth all around the world. And he was successful in bugging our embassies in the Soviet Union and elsewhere by simply putting an electronic device inside of the ambassador's office, meeting rooms, touching inside of light bulbs. It's really fascinating stuff. I think you really enjoy reading this one. That's Glinsky, Theremin, Ether, and Espionage. So Clara Rockmore, she goes to the studio. Theremin is instantly enthralled by her. She was a beautiful woman, a fellow musician, fascinated with the instrument. So what was there not to love about her? So of course they start a romantic relationship, and she makes a lot of suggestions to Dr. Theremin on how to improve the articulation of the device, the range of the device, how to get staccatos out of it. She goes on to play with symphonies. She plays at Carnegie Hall. And finally, Hollywood gets a hold of her. And this happens with, and Rita mentioned this in the introduction, the film Spellbound, which is being produced by David Selznick and directed by Alfred Hitchcock. And for those of you who have seen it before, of course, it stars Gregory Peck and Ingrid Bergman. Now, this is a good movie night because this has all of the typical Alfred Hitchcock suspense, and of course, there's a love interest between Ingrid Bergman and Gregory Peck in this, and it is basically a chick flick love story, but thinly veiled as a suspense. You'll really like this. Now, what I want you to do is when you're listening to this, be aware of the soundtrack, because the quick story I'm going to tell you now is that when Alfred Hitchcock and Selznick were working on this film and coming up with the the concept of Gregory Peck's persona, he's having some psychotic episodes, and what they envisioned was that the composer Miklos Rosa, who was brought in to write the score for the film, Alfred Hitchcock and Selznick asked him if there was a musical instrument that could depict his unstable psychotic state of mind when he was having his episodes. So he suggested the theremin. Well, the two of them looked completely confused and didn't know what the heck he was talking about. They thought it was something you could eat or drink. They thought it was a cocktail. But after they started moving along and the score was coming along, Rosa did a pilot piece of the score and then had some motifs that he came up with. There's a love motif, a spring motif, and then the psychotic chase scene motif, which is the most famous one. All of them are covered by the theremin in the score, and they're absolutely brilliant. And of course, the orchestrations are amazing too. But it really, really depicts Gregory Peck's unstable state of mind when he's having his psychotic episodes. And so I think from that day forward, the instrument was considered the official instrument of psychosis. Because, you think about it, an accordion evokes a certain, mood. You might be thinking of an alley somewhere in Paris. You hear a solo violin. You might think of, a romantic scene in a restaurant. You hear a saxophone. You might think of the streets of New Orleans and a soloist playing in some alley somewhere. Well, when you hear the theremin, for better or worse, it is the instrument of psychosis. Sorry about that. So back to Clara. So Clara was approached by Hollywood to play the score for this film. And she put her foot down and said, absolutely not. It's a serious classical instrument, and it should be treated with dignity and respect, and you will not disrespect my instrument. And so she refused to play it. Well, all right, well, shame on her, because by the time the film came around in the 1940s, the interest in the theremin had sort of waned and died off, and this would have been a huge revival for her, but sadly it wasn't. So Sam Hoffman, who was another scientist, theremin, geeky type guy, stepped up to the plate and did the recording of the Spellbound, which later was reduced to the Spellbound Concerto, which fortunately I've been able to play it several times with a couple of orchestras, and it's a reduction of the score for, this is the Spellbound Piano, this is the Spellbound Concerto for piano and orchestra. This was done here with Klaus-Peter Seibel several years ago, and it went off very well. The audience loved it. They didn't throw panties or any underwear at me on stage, but that would have been nice. But Dr. Hoffman stepped up to the plate, played for the score of Spellbound, and also for The Day the Earth Stood Still. So now where I'm moving into is the genre of sci-fi films and that kind of thing, and I'm giving you an example of films. So your homework assignment between this installment and the next one is going to be to go get some of these things out on eBay or on YouTube or so forth, and watch these films and listen to the score. So what I've done so far is giving you examples, some sublime examples of the theremin and its use in science fiction. Today, the theremin is still used in film scores, and there are composers composing for it today. I won't play any of that for you today. That'll be the next installment when we talk about repertoire, how to choose repertoire for it, what's appropriate for the instrument, in my opinion. So I showed you some sublime examples. Well, this is a less sublime example, but this goes on to the ridiculous. But this is Mars Attacks. And this is a real tongue-in-cheek look at the whole sci-fi genre, and I think that you really get a kick out of this. But the theremin in this case is used very delicately through the score, and they got the joke, they understood, they understand the genre, they understand the instrument, and Danny Elfman, who is the brilliant composer, you've heard him in films all over the place, takes full advantage of the theremin in this, and I highly recommend this one too. Also, Dr. Hoffman, and this is a thanks to you, Rita Lovett. In the beginning, some of you have asked me in the past, how on earth did I get involved with the theremin? Well, thanks to Rita Lovett. She mentioned it to me when we were both at Tulane University one summer doing summer lyric theater, and some backstage conversation led us to obscure musical instruments. And she told me this story, and Rita, I'll make this brief. She said that many years ago that she was at a department store in Milwaukee, I think that's right, and she said she heard this really eerie music coming up from the mezzanine of the department store, which, like department stores here, D.H. Holmes, Maison Blanche, had a music department on the mezzanine where they sold pianos and sheet music and so forth. Of course, we had Werleins here. Well, she went into this store and heard this crazy music coming from the mezzanine, went to watch the demonstration, and then she thought it was smoke and mirrors and was a hoax. Well, it turns out it wasn't, and it was actually probably Samuel Hoffman, who was playing selections on the theremin, giving a demonstration, and Rita Lovett gave me this as a theremin gift, which was has sort of cursed me since then and got me involved in the theremin, which led me to master's degrees and so on and so forth. It's been an amazing ride. But this one is music out of the moon, and then there is the companion to this one, this is on 78s, of course. The companion to this one is Music Perfume. So it's actually these real kitschy arrangements with a choir, Hammond organ, and Sam Hoffman playing the theremin on these. They're available on CD, the CD version. Or you can maybe hear them on YouTube. So now, Clara. So we left Clara walking away from Spellbound, and let me get back on track here. Okay, so theremin. So in the meantime, Clara has walked away from the Hollywood contract. Now let me back up a little bit to when the instrument was actually introduced. He was granted a patent in 1928 to produce the theremin here in the United States. And RCA, Wurlitzer, among other companies. Of course, everybody knows Wurlitzer from the Wurlitzer harp and Wurlitzer jukeboxes, all that kind of stuff. But before they became popular for the jukeboxes in World War II, of course, Wurlitzer sold everything and put their name on everything. RCA put their name on everything. RCA produced the RCA theremin. It was not Leon Theremin, it wasn't the theremin, it was theremin. Theremin. They produced about 450 to 500 of the instruments, and they were marketed in the fall of 1929. Well, we know what that is. That's stock market crash. Very, very bad time to try and sell an obscure instrument that no one can learn how to play it easily because there are no teachers. They didn't think of that part. And they also tried to market the instrument by saying, literally, that the instrument was going to be as easy to play as people could walk and talk. Or they said that people could play the instrument by simply walking up to it and playing a tune. Well, that was about as far from the truth as it could be. Nobody was able to play it. Clara went on to become the virtuosa of the instrument, as I said. But except for a few standouts, there have been very, very few people who can actually play it with any, with any clarity or dexterity. So they made 450 to 500. They only sold about 200 of them. The rest of them either went to the dump or they gave them away to universities, and there they sit. There are a lot of them sitting, original ones sitting around in storage and probably never be heard again. So I think where I'm going to go from here is describe this instrument that I have in front of you. The last time I played for the Baton Rouge for your club, I brought what was simply called, I call it the black box. And it is just simply the easiest version, which I built myself from a kit that you can buy from Moog Enterprises. You can still buy it today. And it was okay for playing popular music and things that had a fairly small range. But as I started getting more and more concerts and opportunities to play the instrument, I was approached by Klaus-Peter Seibel here that said that he wanted to do a U.S. premiere of the First Symphony by Lyra Auerbach, Auerbach. And she is a Russian composer who wrote a symphony that lasts about 45 minutes or so, 7 movements, which includes the theremin in every one of the movements. Well, coincidentally, this was the last semester of my graduate program, and I had to come up with a recital program to finish the degree. So Klaus-Peter approached me that last semester, and so I went to my committee at the university and told them that what I wanted to do was play the symphony as my graduate recital. Well, of course, they're like, what? You know, first they have a theremin major in the department. This is at the University of New Orleans, who was very gracious to have me there and put up with my shenanigans for a few years. But hey, it was the first time they ever had a theremin major. And so they all just laughed and thought, this is incredible because you're the first one who's ever played a graduate recital with a symphony. So, and it would be on the theremin yet. So Well, I did it, but not until I looked at the score, which of course was a lot of music and a lot of theremin playing. But the problem is that she wrote it for a modern theremin over a range of 9 octaves. Well, the piano has 7.5 octaves, which the theremin can cover fairly well. But when you start getting an octave or two above the keyboard into dog whistle range, that becomes a challenge. Well, I couldn't play it on my black box. So I called her, and she was in St. Petersburg, and I told her, I said, this is impossible for me to play on my instrument. Can I transpose it down and move the octaves down and make it work? And she says, you will play it as written. And she says, and I will send you my instrument. So she shipped her instrument, which is identical to this one that you see here. This was a concert instrument that Bob Moog designed about 20 years ago, and produced a few hundred of them. I was fortunate to be able to get one myself. But you can imagine the anxiety playing a symphony with the orchestra, a piece of that size, which was enough to begin with. And then 5 days before the performance, I get a brand new instrument. So that was a little bit stressful, to say the least. But it does give me the ability to play the 9-octave range, and I'll demonstrate that to you right now. The normal range of the theremin, like I said, is from about right here to the tip of the antenna. So it's not this way, it's this way. And so if you imagine rings of an onion around this antenna here, and each one of the rings represents a different pitch, the idea is to stab the pitch right in the eye, right? Try and get the pitch exactly in the center, and then make the adjustment. And do it the same way every time. So you see what I'm saying? You can get it fairly accurate with a lot of practice, and then don't move very much. So now if I change the register and my hand's in the same place, you're going to see that it's way high up. You hear it? It's the same pitch, but it's 2 or 3 octaves up. And then of course I can go all the way up here. That's the pitch again, but now about 4 octaves higher and almost inaudible to most people. That is where that score was written, up in that range for the instrument, and that was the requirement of the score, which required this instrument to be able to play it. She continues to write scores today, and all of her music has a range that includes the whole compass of the piano keyboard, plus some, and then of course more percussive effects, which are really interesting. Her stuff is amazing. I also recommend that you look up Lyra Auerbach on YouTube. And the most recent one that I recorded was Icarus. Icarus, the legend of Icarus, where the son and father fly too close to the sun, and the son's wings melt and he falls into the sea. So more drama and perfect for the theremin. So having said all of that, I think I've covered most everything for this session. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play for you with my 1927 Ampico reproducing piano, Kanabi, and she will accompany me playing Noel Coward's I'll Be Seeing You Again. And why this song? Well, of course, the words say it all. I'll be seeing you again the next time. So enjoy the music, and thank you again for inviting me back. you.